TPCSI fans, you want to revolutionize your sports investing habits? Allow me to tell you about WagerWire. WagerWire is an app that helps you become a superior bettor by allowing you to sync all your sports books and track all your bets in one place. See your current action, your betting history, and stats. You could also sign up for sports books and collect bonus offers. Follow them at WagerWire on X, as it's the best account on the platform. Head to App Store or Play Store now and search WagerWire and download the app.
2,000 years long, we will never settle. Hard days, no way, we're the heavy metal. No time, no fail, won't stop here. Like a torch to a flame when it burns hot. We won't stop, come on, baby, higher. Like a torch to a flame when it burns hot. We won't stop.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and as you can see, I'm smiling ear to ear. I am super stoked. Good friend, colleague, Mr. Ron Marmalefsky is back for year 3. And we connected 3+ years ago. I've been following him. I love his work. I love everything that he brings to the table. We both have that AOL email way back in the day. We're kind of wired the same way, and it, like we were talking backstage with Paul Stone, it's great to work and talk to people that kind of think the same way. So we're blessed and honored to have him back here. We moved him from Friday to Thursday. So Thursdays 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, where he is live in LA right now. So super stoked. NFL, college football, the best of the best. So buckle up, enjoy, ask away. I know Russell Saylor will be here at some point talking Colts and all kinds of good stuff. So first and foremost, a shout out to our proud sponsor or partnerships, and that's WagerWire, of course. If you haven't downloaded the app, please run over to Google Play and download it. It's free. I promise you, myself, Travis, Zach, the rest of that team and community will take great care of you. Viva Tequila, Seltzer, CT Bets, the rest of that team and family. We just got our reloaded. Thank you, CT. It's going to be a great Labor Day weekend at the Dawson household. My daughters love them, and everyone on Cape Cod loves them. So we're cuckoo for coconut, CT. So head on over to your local watering hole or sports events. Ask for Viva. If they don't have them, ask why. Tell them to wake up. It's 2024. Here. And our last new sponsor in partnership, Atlanta Steak and Seafood, Terry Smith. Go follow him on Facebook at Terry Smith at Atlanta Steaks and Seafood. I know you guys have heard of Omaha. Well, there's a new sheriff in town, and it's Atlanta Steaks and Seafood. I get him once a month. I'm telling you, the steak is second to none. The lamb chops right behind. Terry does an amazing job. And we got grilling season throughout football. Before you know it, it'll be Thanksgiving, Christmas. So what better way to start the fall off than with some Atlanta Steaks and Seafood. So enough of me. Let's bring in the real star of this show, the one and only Mr. Ron Marmalefsky.
Hi there. It's almost Labor Day. That must mean football is in the air. Another milestone date. For me, there are 3 milestone dates. May 15th, work is done in the NFL. Let's start going to Hawaii, British Columbia, wherever, downsize. July 4th, there goes the fireworks. Got to start the college prep in earnest. And we're just a couple of days away from Labor Day, and the games begin.
Shout out to Hector, because we take all the Ron we can get. Welcome back, Hector, as well. Yes, usually standing room only. It might be a slow crowd funneling in, but once the bells and whistles are sounded and they see Ron is back, we'll have standing room only here. College football, week 0, the dogs were barking. We got week 1 here. I know the extensive work you do. It's not the Final Four, it's 12. So take us from the draft I guess, and again, your summertime, but as your prep went, because we talked, as you were doing your wrap ups, Ron, and there was a part of you that didn't know without no Pac-12. We know you're near and dear to the Pac-12 in Oregon State. You were maybe going to close the door on college football. Then you reached out to me and says, "Nope, I'm back and I'm ready to go." So thoughts, turning the pages, and what you had to go through to get to where you are today.
Yeah, what a question to start out with. That's a good one. I'm a little excited about the expanded playoff, primarily because you're going to see teams that just couldn't get over the hump, like the Penn States of the world, that are inclusive now. 12 is too many. I'd still rather see 8. There was a time, the off the field stuff bothers me still. All the nil and the money. You got a kicker going from one school to another just because he was offered money here and there and so on. And I'm all for scholarships and stuff. But at the end of the day, not many of these people are going to play the NFL. And if they do, they're going to play in the NFL for 3.5 years. That college degree is still so important. Pac-12's demise is completely unfortunate and TV driven. I've reached kind of a compromise because I want to see how I'm going to do with this year as we continue on with the last 2 years have been unbelievably fantastic. I was very involved in the season win market as usual this off season, and you never know what's going to happen. But I like the numbers I have. The compromise I'm making is I'm not watching Oregon football this year. I'm not watching Arizona football this year. I'm not watching Washington football. I just have such a sour taste with them. I'll read the box scores, I'll learn what I need to do, and I'll watch the games I want to watch. But I just don't have a taste for those teams. I have a taste for college football, but not the wrong that was done in terms of the West Coast. California is going to be playing on the entire other coast. I don't understand it.
Take the Pac-12. I mean, it was, and the sad thing about the Pac-12, Ron, it was probably one of its best years in a long, long time. I mean, Oregon, Washington, fabulous teams. USC, again, a down year, but again, the year prior, Caleb Williams, Heisman Trophy, a down year, but again, number one pick this year in the NFL draft. Stories galore, and now they transition to the Big Ten. And I know there's a lot of sharps out there that have Oregon playing in that championship game. So give me your thoughts with the Pac-12 and how those teams are going to transition to the Big Ten.
Yeah, that's a big question. That's part of all of our handicapping. We've got these data, whether or not they're new coaches or old coaches, that I carry forward. I look at data year to year to year and look for situations, patterns, coaching patterns, and so on. And now they're going to be prepping for completely different teams. And then in this new era, whatever, you're going to have a rematch of the championship game, right? Washington against Michigan. Then they're not going to look anything like last year. Washington has one returning starter and most of its staff is completely gone. Michigan has a handful of returning starters, a whole bunch of guys, 13 drafted, 18 to the combine, completely different team. The interim coach is now the head coach, but a lot of his staff is gone. So you're going to be dealing with, you can't treat last year's Washington team at all like this year's Washington team and so on. I think, for example, like a California going to the Atlantic Coast Conference, the bigger issue to me is they had a new offensive coordinator last year. He really did a wonderful job. Baylor poached him, so now he's with Baylor. California has to go with its third offensive coordinator in as many years. They can't prep for the same teams that they were facing. So money talked even there. California lost somebody because of all this extra money. Arizona goes to the Big 12, which is a free-for-all. We know that 8, 9, 10 different teams can win that conference. I expect in a 10-year period, you're going to have 7 different champions the way that's built. But Arizona lost its head coach to Washington. It was a $5 million raise, $4.75 million raise for him to go from Arizona to Washington because Washington has money. Arizona didn't have that kind of money to deal with. So the combination of transfers of schools to different leagues, transfers of key players to other teams, and just coaching transitions, it's a mess out there, and you really have to re-handicap from scratch with some of these teams.
And, just the mindset. And again, I'm strictly a numbers guy. I read the market. I follow all the trends, the stats, and everything like that. But again, we're fixated on the market, and the mindset is a warm weather team, UCLA or USC, traveling to Madison, Wisconsin in November on a Saturday noon kickoff, when in their head it's 9 or 10 a.m. back home. I mean, there's a lot just before you get the opening kickoff there.
Yeah, I was in University of Wisconsin Stadium to visit my nephew when Oregon State played there with some ungodly 9 a.m. kickoff or whatever, and it was, you could see the body the body level in terms of being in that 2 hour time delay and playing in the early morning time. The West Coast is going to do the same thing. They're going to have the late time so that the East Coast teams are playing like at 10 o'clock or 10:30 at night. But it is a difference. But the other thing is, it's a difference in style of play. On the one hand, you've got a Pac-12 team that's now going to another conference. They're not going to see Bo Nix and Michael Penix and Caleb Williams, last year's quarterbacks that they saw. They're going to face an easier slate of quarterbacks. So that's good news for these teams. The bad news is they're going to see a whole different type of smash mouth defense and these physical defensive lines and offensive lines. And it's a different style of play that Pac-12 teams are going to have to get used to. Oregon, I think you mentioned Oregon briefly because they're one of the players in the Final Four, Final Eight. They have a coach that has SEC roots, and I think they're better prepared for the transition than maybe a USC and maybe a Stanford or a Cal. I'm curious to see whether the fact that Dan Lanning came from that conference, a different conference, and was already building Oregon to be in a different mentality, whether that pays off now that they're in a different conference.
Well, before we get to what everyone's been asking for, and then that's your power rankings, how you come about them, there's a game in a couple weeks. Ohio State at Oregon. I think the Pika headline is actually Oregon being favored in this game. And I know it's early to ask you, but I have to do my job here, Ron. Does your power rankings have Oregon -1 against Ohio State?
I should have to look that up here. I think it's going to be pretty close. I mean, I have a clear top two with Georgia and Ohio State, like everybody else. And I have a clear next two with Texas and Oregon. While Alabama is 5th or 6th, I'm not as high on Alabama as others because of a variety of reasons. First and foremost is Nick Saban's not there. But Oregon, yeah, I would probably say I would have that line roughly Ohio State 1/2, kind of in that area right there. So it's in the ballpark. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. It's a tough test for both teams. Typically, if you know, and I've said this on your show and others in the past, it's not that matchup that excites me. It's what happens to these teams the next week. Where's the letdown factor and stuff? So while I will watch these kinds of games as a spectator, I'll be very excited if one team is just either so high or so low after that game that I could do my handicapping thing the next week.
Well, let's transition right there into power rankings. That's a big time topic. A lot of people are interested in the concept, how you get to your numbers, and what how come your numbers are different than, let's say, Paul Stone's numbers, or let's say Kenny White's numbers. And the point is, everyone is different. We've been working together now for 3 years, and I'm always asking you about power rankings, and you always have those numbers there. So the stage is yours. Everyone here is with open ears, pens and pads. They want to hear it, Ron.
Okay, well, thanks for giving me the platform to do this. I had planned to do this even before I came about what Paul did. And so in the 15 minutes or so that I'm going to be reading, apologize in advance, I'm going to be reading from notes more than anything so that I make sure I cover everything I want to cover. But the 15 minutes doesn't do any kind of justice to how to do power ratings. I encourage everybody to go back and take a listen to Paul Stone's 3-part series on it. So he spent a good hour and a half or more talking about power ratings and creating them. And it's one thing to use them and it's one thing to create them. If people want to, and he mentioned this too, if people want to use what Danny Sheridan or Jeff Sagarin uses out of USA Today, or Kelly Ford, who's on Twitter X. He does an excellent job and he shares with everybody. Or find somebody else's like you mentioned, or even Paul's. Brad Powers does an exceptional job with his power ratings and stuff. You start from that, and those are only guidelines because there's 3 methods of handicapping that I use. It's the most important one is matchup analysis. How does one team fare against another? Who wins the line of scrimmage? That part of the game hasn't changed for 100 years. Then there's situational factors in terms of revenge games, short weeks, all these kinds of things. The NFL is going to be full of them this year because it's an incredibly unfair schedule this year. And then there's the power ratings. And if they're off by a point or two, to me, it's no big deal. When they start being off by 3 points or more, then I've got some value. And then I take that into account and you can have a play that way. So how did I actually get started with this kind of thing? I did a lot of back testing. I think it takes a lot of practice to find the formula that works for somebody. So back a long time ago, let's just say early 80s, late 70s and stuff like that, no internet, that kind of stuff. But there were magazines and periodicals, and you can use that. They had the spread, the point spreads. You could use the library for back issues of so that you can find the data on the games. And I went with a magazine's opening power numbers, and then I tried to adjust them week by week for 1 year. And then I looked at starters returning. Remember, there wasn't any nil, name, image, likeness. There wasn't transfer portal. People stayed. There weren't 33 coaches that change hands every year in college. There were 10 or 12. People were quieter in terms of that. Your rosters were set. So when 4 offensive linemen graduated and you only had 1 offensive lineman back, that was a tremendous red flag back in the day. You couldn't just pick up somebody else. You had to grow your own. So at the end of the year of my first looking at the power ratings, then I looked back at the next year because I went back 3 years to do this research. And in the second year, I crafted my own opening power ratings based on starters lost, coaching schemes, so on and so forth. And I walked them all the way through the end of the year. And I compared them to lines that were happening during those weeks and months. How did I do? When my power ratings were off, was I successful? Was I not successful? Why? Obviously, there could have been injury information and so on. And then I did it a third year to get to hone it in. And only after those 3 years of data, then I was ready for the season that was actually happening. I started my own power ratings. All of a sudden, I had 3 years of data with how the team and coaching had changed over those 3 years. And I knew how to make the adjustments that I like to make in terms of how much to downgrade a team for an unexpected loss or an expected win, or how much to upgrade a team because they won by this much over the point spread versus this much over the point spread, or something that I do that maybe some others don't do. I reward teams that have great defensive efforts, especially this time of an age where everybody's focusing on offense. They make it harder for the defense to allow just 7 or 10 points. So I did that in terms of how I adjust my power ratings. And then a road victory, a road upset is more critical to me than a home upset. So I'll go into this just a little bit. Let me emphasize a couple of other points that Paul made, and I want to piggyback on those. He uses a baseline, roughly, he said in his tutorial, about 3.5 points for home field advantage, which is exactly what I do. 3.5 points in general for home field advantage. Now, November games in the MAC that draw 6,000 people, and the MAC home team is 2-7, and they can't make a bowl game, they're not going to get 3.5 points home field advantage. So I'm adjusting during the year what the home field advantage is, but it's a good benchmark to just generally start, if you haven't done this, to use maybe 3.5 points. In the NFL, I use home field advantage between 1.25 points and 1.75 points, depending on the team. The Chargers are only going to get closer to 1.25. They just don't have, at least right now, pre-Harbaugh era, a home field advantage like somebody else, like a Pittsburgh or something like that. But it's much smaller home field advantage in terms of the NFL game. Like Paul, I use whole numbers and half numbers. I don't have a power rating of 72.27 or something like that. It's going to be a 72, 72.5, or 73. It's not that exact science. If the number's off by a few points, it doesn't matter to me whether it's off by 4.2 points or 4.1 or 4.0 points. It's off. So I kind of try to use whole numbers there. So how do you design an opening power number if you're doing this, even if you have the 3 years of work? So it's a 6-step process for me. It's not an easy thing. It takes me 2 full days. I have data. I have the team sheets that I've shown you in the past, and I look at how the ebb and flow of their power rating went from last year. Where did it start? Where did it end? Did they tank the last 2 games and really their ending power rating should have been just 2 or 3 points higher? I really evaluate that. I look at their data. I look at their personnel. I look at their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, coaching changes, personnel changes, how many returned on the offensive line and defensive line. And then I set an opening number based just on the team in a vacuum, just by itself. And then I go through this process. So the process starts by, I compare them in conference. So let's say the Big Ten. I've looked at all the Big Ten teams. I've assigned a power rating. Now I look at them side by side and I say, wait a second. It looks to me, just by the eye test, that maybe Iowa and Wisconsin should be closer than I have them, or so on and so forth. So I'm fiddling around by a point or two with all these conference numbers. So I'm looking at that. Once I feel good in the alignment in the conference number, then I compare to all 134 teams. I use Excel. So I'm just, Florida State's an 88. Okay. Missouri's an 88. Am I comfortable with that? What's the net, Auburn is an 83. Am I comfortable with how they relate to Missouri, with how they relate to an out-of-conference team? So I'm just doing alignment things first by conference and then by the whole thing. Then I'm doing something I didn't think many people did, but Paul brought it up, so I feel like I'm in good hands. He looks at the game of the years, and so do I. I look at the game of the years to see, when Alabama plays Tennessee in week 5, what's their line? And how does that relate to my power ratings? That doesn't mean I'll change it, but I'm really curious. And I usually find about 4 or 5 teams where I'm consistently low or I'm consistently high on. I found that when I did it with my first pass through, that I was probably about 5 points lower than I should have been with Alabama. I was really downgrading them with the loss of Saban. And even though I still have feelings that they're not quite as good as people might think, I needed to up that number based on all these game of the years things that showed me so consistently wrong or off by all these points, 5, 6, 7 points. I needed to change it. And some cases I was high, and I knew I would be high on a couple of teams because I was using my own bias to be high on a couple of those teams. So I put them a little bit more in alignment. I didn't want them so skewed. So I do that with the games of the year. And then I go back to the conference and I go back to the Big Ten and I say, now I have a new alignment in the Big Ten. How comfortable am I with that? And then when I get comfortable with that, then those are my numbers that I roll out. And then we're good to go. And whether it's the NFL or the college, Jeff, I'm not trying to predict where the team's power rating is going to be week 6. All I care about is what does that power rating read for week 1? That's all I care about. And then I use how to adjust these numbers. And Paul talks about that too. How many should you lower? How many should you higher? And I kind of hinted at that part of it is based on spread of score, by if it's an upset or not an upset. And then let me give you one other example. Let's say my line going into the game is 5 points different. I mean, there's a big difference. So I call it a power rating play. So I'm going to play on that team, barring any unforeseen circumstance. And if I have matchup data to go with it, it's going to be a 2% or 3% play, not just a small play. Let's say my team wins nicely. I'll give you an example. They didn't even win nicely. SMU played last week and they barely won, right? They were 27-point favorites. A lot of people made an adjustment because of that of 2.5 points. My adjustment was not as big because my line on that game was 20.5 points. I did not have SMU high enough. So my thinking was SMU was closer to my expectation than it was to the sports books or the handicapper who set the line's expectation. So I was closer. I don't have to adjust as much. In cases where I'm wrong, I always go ahead and put in an extra point of value. Wow, I was off 4 or 5 points. I'm not going to make my standard adjustment. I have to adjust one more because I was wrong on this team. And then if I'm wrong twice on the team, I'm making another adjustment. So I have a built-in formula for 133 out of the 134 teams. For Toledo, I have no formula because they haven't followed power ratings logic for 10 years. You can give me any power rating Toledo has. I'm going to get it wrong. They're going to get it wrong. They could win it. They could be favored by 16 and lose by 16. They can be underdog by 7 and win by 10. Except for Toledo, I got this down pat.
Amazing stuff. And I love, as you said, Paul Stone, yourself, again, great minds think alike. And for everyone watching here, we got a boatload here. That was lesson number 1 of many more to come. You can go follow Ron, obviously, at ronacesports on Twitter. You can ask away, and as Hector, Russell, and a lot of other people that watch weekly here and at Wager Talk, they know exactly what you're talking about. Weekend games today, so you got your power ratings. We've already gone through week 0. We knew the dogs were barking. North Carolina at Minnesota. The big game everyone's talking about, of course, North Dakota State at Colorado and Coach Prime. And listen, I was born at night, not last night. Okay, that number has moved about 2.5 points just today. I'm not buying the steam, Ron. Talk about what's going on tonight.
Okay, I didn't really handicap the Colorado game. I do look at the FCS, the kind of things. I actually have more plays than usual involving, give you an example on this sheet, Howard and Rutgers. I have an opinion on the total or something like that. Or let me give you another one here. BYU, Southern Illinois. So I have a couple of those types of games, but I'm not really all I want to know from those teams is how many returning starters they have. Do they have the same coach and so on? It's really forming an opinion on the 134 teams that I actually handicapped. So I didn't form an opinion on Colorado's opponent this week. I know Colorado reshaped their roster again, another 60, 70 people after about 85 people the year before. I think Coach Prime has a better idea of where the deficiencies lie, but we're going to find out. I mean, his team couldn't pass protect. He was getting his son killed because they allowed so many sacks. His team couldn't defend the run. Now, they're going to have all new offensive line starters, so I don't know how this meshes together. And they've got 2 or 3 really superstars that are going to be playing in the NFL. But as far as a complete roster, I still don't see it. And for the overall picture for Colorado, I'm still a little more bearish than bullish. We saw what happened when they got into Pac-12 play last year. They just got demolished. The more wins they got in the preseason, the better it was for you and I, because at one point their sack ratio was they had one sack and they had allowed 16. And I'm saying, okay, they're 3-0, but they are not a 3-0 team. These are things that I'm going to be looking for inside the box scores, what we're looking for. Even when you're adjusting power ratings, to get back to that point, you're looking inside the box score. Was there a botched punt that cost them 44 rushing yards? That kind of thing. You're looking at these nuggets to find out. So I'm using this Colorado State game tonight just as a teaching point for myself. Where is the roster? What's going to happen? Are there any signs that pass protection and the run defense have improved?
I'm going to go to two more games, then we're going to transition to the NFL. I was talking to Paul this morning here. I don't remember. I don't know if you remember the last time a team had just three road games the whole season, and I'm talking about Notre Dame, and they open up against the 13th man at the Aggies, a line that most people had Texas -1, Texas A&M -1. Now it's gone to 3 to 2.5. Big game for both sides. Ron actually leans towards the Irish here. He likes the fact that they're bringing a lot more players back. It's an absolute coin flip here. Any thoughts on Notre Dame at Texas A&M? And secondly, have you seen a schedule with just three road games in a whole season?
No, Notre Dame's branching out. Of course, they have a tremendous fan base, so they're playing a lot of neutral site games. And that's good for their brand. And obviously, it's a national brand. That's why they haven't joined a conference. They're still Notre Dame. That's how they feel. If they start missing the 12-team playoff, that brand's going to disappear a little bit, because they have every expectation, even though they're not going to be a home team, they're going to have a home game. They're not going to have that bye, that 1 through 4, because it's reserved for the conference. But they're going to have a home game in that first round of the playoffs. They fully expect, and I like their coaching staff, to be in the top 12 mixture. And A&M, I don't think their last coach was a bad coach. I do like Elko, so I think there's a little bit of an upgrade there. They were just sitting on great recruiting. I wish they would have given Fisher one more year, but now there's another turnstile change in terms of who's staying, who's going, and that kind of stuff. A&M's going to be good. I don't know if they're going to be good right off the bat. I like Riley Leonard. I know he's down an offensive tackle who got hurt. It's already been 2 or 3 weeks, so they're bringing in another one. Yeah, according to my numbers, I would favor A&M by 0.5 point. So it's a little strange to me in terms of where the number is, but it's not enough to make it a power rating play. It still has to be 3.5 or more points different than my power ratings to be purely a power rating play. There's usually 5 to 7 or 8 of those a week. That's not one of them. I think it'll be a very interesting game. And I think the loser of the game's not in trouble, not with the expanded playoff. And I think you just chalk it up to the fact that these are two evenly matched teams and one of them has to lose. So I'm not going to read into that unless it's 40-0 or something like that.
And lastly, I talked and asked Paul about this. It used to be a team that played one game and now they come home, and we're talking obviously Florida State, a team that undefeated excuse me, last year, and then down to the third string quarterback. Do they get in? Do they not get in? That whole drama there as well. They traveled to Dublin, and Georgia Tech, a walk-off touchdown. And again, the whole world seemed to be jumping on Tech late there. So, I don't want to say it was a public or a pro versus Joe game. Now they come home to face Boston College. Coach Bill O'Brien. I'll be working my second year at the home games of Boston College this year with Anthony Pepe. And I'm excited for that. I'm excited for Bill O'Brien. Absolutely adore and love their quarterback who's coming back, Mr. Castellanos. Their under-over is only 4.5. They're not expecting a lot of wins at the Heights this year. Yet everyone I talk to says Florida State is overinflated, overvalued, and this line's around 16 and a half and 17. So I guess my first question is thoughts on a team that's already played versus the opener for an opposing team, and an FSU team overvalued right now and only 16 and a half, 17-point favorites against BC.
Yeah, so I can play devil's advocate here. This is good because sometimes I go on shows, I've been on roundtables and stuff where we all seem to agree, but maybe we all seem to agree because we're all coming from the same point of view to start with. I think this is an overcorrection. I fully expected Florida State to struggle week one, especially with that opponent. If you look at the fact that Florida State lost 2 defensive linemen to the NFL, and I'm not just talking about 2 defensive linemen in the 7th round. They lost Jared Verse, right? And they lost another person, 2, and I think it was 1 in the first round, 1 in the second round, if I recall correctly. The defensive line against a team that's balanced and understands spacing like Georgia Tech. I did not predict the upset, but I certainly predicted a close game. There was just a matchup nightmare for Florida State. But Florida State's the kind of team, this is going to happen throughout to a lot of teams. Week one's not going to be where they are, week 5, because they have all these new faces and they're going to get them ready to go and so on. Coming from Dublin's not easy, but they have a couple of extra days, right? If I remember correctly, or do they have no extra days?
Monday night game.
Monday. So they have a couple of extra days. Georgia Tech is the one that doesn't have a couple of extra days. They go 7-7, and Florida State has 9. But I have them power rating closer to 20. So I think it's an overcorrection, even if Florida State doesn't cover because of the long trip or because Boston College might be a little bit better than people think. O'Brien's there. That's all nice and so on. Tough job to be at Boston College to begin with. But I think Florida State's going to be fine during the season. So, and the 1 game versus 0, yeah, if you look at it strictly by the numbers, the teams that have played 1 game, I think they're roughly 43% or something like that against the spread. So there's a lot of circumstances that go on with that. So I just kind of treat it as just I'm not using that much in my handicapping, whether they played or they not played.
It was funny because a year ago, Florida State traveled to the Heights and we were having a hurricane. So we did not have to go up to the game. And if I remember correctly, FSU was 26, 27-point favorites. A little money came in on BC late. Maybe it closed around 24 and a half or something. And BC had the ball and driving late in the fourth quarter to go and tie and win that game. And the Castellanos, I think, fumbled late there. So Florida State escaped. Now the public remembers what they saw last, which was, again, Florida State losing to Georgia Tech. They look at last year's matchup saying, wow, geez, BC almost beat them there. I'm going to gobble up that 16 and a half, 17 points. And as you said, probably 23-point lead. Florida State late. Maybe BC's got the ball for a backdoor cover, but I kind of agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia Tech pulled something like 4 or 5 upsets, and they pulled a lot of upsets over the years because they have a style of play. Part of the reason I made that play last week was not just because Georgia Tech could hang with them, that even if they fell outside the number, Georgia Tech's offense was capable of what you were just talking, a backdoor cover. So they didn't need the backdoor cover, but that was always in my mind. Do they have the kind of offense that if they get behind, they can score that touchdown, that eased up touchdown when you have double-digit favorites? That's part of the handicapping tool, and Georgia Tech had that. We'll see whether Boston College has that with the new coaching staff and so on, if they need it. Maybe they don't need it because there's a hangover effect from Florida State. But I think Florida State will be okay this year. Where I had them rated was probably 12th or 13th. So they were right on the border of making the playoffs. And in my opinion, I shared this one other place, and people were kind of looking at me funny. But I said, if they're on the border of making the 12-team playoffs, I think the committee is going to put them in because they took them out last year in favor of Nick Saban. So I think Florida State's goal is to make the decision up to the committee again.
Let's stay right there for 1 second. A headliner game, a team that has disappointed the last few years. I'm talking Clemson. Dabo Swinney has still not found a quarterback since Trevor Lawrence left, and of course Deshaun Watson. We used to know about their quarterback play, their offense, and of course their stymied defense. Well, defense has been okay. They've been on the field a lot more the last few years than normal. Sweeney starting to catch a little, chatter and heat from the alum and the supporters there. 13.5-point underdogs to Georgia, who everyone has as the number 1 or 1A with Ohio State. Power ratings, do you have right around 13, 14? And is there any chance that Dabo can shock the world and beat the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I have it power rated right about there, so no problems there. Test case for all of college football because Dabo Swinney is the old school, old school. No portal transfers. In this day and age, that's absolutely unheard of. He's a grow your own coach, and to his credit, very few people transferred out of the program, and anybody who did transfer out probably recognized that they weren't getting playing time. So we're talking about loyalty to the program. Does that work in this day and age when you know you have a deficiency? Maybe 2 of your defensive backs graduated and you're growing your own, but they're not ready yet. Nowadays in Alabama can plug and play and say, hey, my kicker graduated, my defensive back graduated. I'll pluck the best player from this team and I'll take them in and make my team better. Well, Dabo Swinney has not gone that extra route to do that, just fill 3 or 4 holes. He's going with what brought him. Part of that is great because of the continuity. I think where they fell off was when both coordinators left for other jobs. And since then, they've replaced, I think, both coordinators again. But about 3 years ago, they left for other jobs. One's there as head coach of Oklahoma, for example. So I think that they started to lose that rhythm where they had such a long-term staff working together where everybody's the same. You see very few programs now, the stable programs like the Utahs and so on, where you have this, or Iowa, for example, same defensive coordinator for years and years and years. So the test case is, can they do it without using the outside world at all? I see this as a defensive struggle more than anything. I would be leaning more toward the under than anything else. But Clemson has a way of keeping things close. When they're over a 3-point dog, they tend to deliver.
Before we go to the NFL, which I've been promising everyone, and we got Ron working overtime already in the first week here, is there one little game or nugget you can release to the standing room only crowd that might have been one of those 5, 6, 7-point power rating differences that you might already have in tow or you got ready for the weekend?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of plays made a long time ago where I have really good line value. So naturally, I'm going to talk about the game where I have 0 line value. I want to play it as this humble statement that I have a line of plus 12 with Georgia Southern against Boise State. And it's contrarian because I know a lot of people like Boise State in this game. Based on power ratings, this would be an automatic power rating play at plus 14, which I never expected it to go. That's why I took plus 12 earlier. But now you're talking about, I've seen 13.5 at one point, and it's mostly 13. Can Georgia Southern get blown out? Sure, they can get blown out. Boise State has one of the best runners in college football. Georgia Southern doesn't defend the run that well. There is a concern. But the reason I bet Georgia Southern is because Clay Helton has this offensive scheme that tends to work early in the year, not as well late in the year. Clay Helton isn't a fantastic coach where his teams necessarily get better at the end of the year, but they've done well at the beginning of years. And the reason is because people aren't quite ready, and maybe it's going to be humid, or it's certainly not on the blue turf for Boise State, where they're going to have to guard against this offense of Georgia Southern that I think is going to do some damage. If it doesn't, I'm certainly going to lose the game. But if it does, I'm going to be okay. And remember, Boise, like everybody in the Mountain West, has a new coach. And he's been there. He energized them for 3 or 4 games. Then in a relatively meaningless bowl game, especially for their opponent, they lost that game. So the jury is out as to how good Boise State's new coach is. So I think from that standpoint and from a matchup standpoint, Boise's strength is Georgia Southern's weakness. Georgia Southern's perceived strength might be an area that Boise will have a little bit of trouble in a true road game. So even though this is one of those games, especially week 1, where I don't usually get the worst of the number, I have the worst of the number, I'm still willing to share it as one of the plays that I made.
We had a little sunlight issue there. Apologies there. I'm going to transition quickly to the NFL because next week when we meet here, Thursday, 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 your time, we'll be into week 2 college football. And, of course, NFL that night will be the opening night. Baltimore plus 2.5 traveling to Kansas City. We'll talk about that. I'm going to say power ratings. And people look at me like I got 10 heads here. I'm going to tell you Jeff Dawson's top 5 in the NFL right now. Well, actually, let me transition it. Let me give you my NFC. I got the Lions at number 1. I got the Eagles at number 2. And here's where people say I fell off the turnip truck, Ron. I got the Packers 3, and I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I will put the 49ers at 4. I think with the 25, 26, 28 injuries that they've had in the offseason, the Ayuk drama, Trent Williams still out, I think the window has shut. They've been to 4 out of the 5 last NFC championship games. They've been to 2 Super Bowls, and they haven't won. And I know their under-over is 11.5, so we'll have this conversation on January 3rd, and they end the year 12-5. They're the number 1 seed in the NFC, and egg on my face. What am I missing, Ron?
I don't think you're missing a lot because, again, and literally 15 minutes before we went on air, I finalized what I'm going to use for my opening power numbers. I put out something on the internet of what my power numbers were after May 15th because that's the end of my NFL work. Nothing happens between May 15th and August 15th in the NFL. Now I'm back. I've done this thing. I've moved some teams up. I've moved some teams down. So now I have my opening power ratings as of 15 minutes before the show. And I have Philly and Detroit dead even and Green Bay a couple points behind them. San Francisco, you're only as the power rating, like I said when we were talking about concepts, all I care about is what is their opening week 1 power rating. And that's a circled power rating. You can't go with a tangible number because Ayuk is out, probably worth about a 0.5 point to me. And their left tackle, Williams, is out. That's worth a full point. So you're talking about 1.5 points off whatever their power rating is already. Obviously, we knew that Greenlaw wasn't going to be ready with his unfortunate injury during the Super Bowl. They do get one of their safeties back, but he hasn't been practicing. So there's a lot of moving parts with this team. We know McCaffrey's probably good to go, but he had hamstring issues. He probably wasn't going to play in the preseason anyway. So San Francisco is definitely the X factor there. At full strength, I'd probably have them dead even with Philly and Detroit, maybe even a little ahead at full strength, but they're not at full strength.
AFC, where the champions have been crowned. Kansas City going for the three-peat. 2 decades of the Patriots and Bill We Trust with Tom Brady. And I think now Kansas City is just them part 2. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. Next man up at wide receiver. We'll just keep drafting him. Rashee Rice looks like he's going to survive the year without a suspension. They draft Xavier Worthy. They got Pacheco. They got this new kid on the block, Carson Steele, that reminds me way back of Mike Allstott type. Their defense, I don't know what it is. The structure, the style, the athletes, they just seem so quick. They just know how to get to the ball. They know how to tackle. Cincinnati, I had a second in the AFC. A healthy Joe Burrow, a chip on their shoulder. T. Higgins betting on himself. The Jamar Chase crap, I am not taking well here, especially in the high stake fantasies. Like San Fran, I think the Baltimore had their shot last year, hosting, didn't have to leave, and Kansas City came in, said not so fast there. Going to be interesting in the AFC East. Buffalo, no Stephon Diggs, no Gabe Davis. They draft Keon Coleman. I know Allen will be fine there. It'll be interesting to see how they play. How many games does Tua play? Obviously, is a big factor. The Jets, 40-year-old malcontent that I guess is starting to divide the locker room there. I saw some tweets today. He is out there. And again, he's healthy supposedly. Thoughts on the AFC, what you have as your top five, and any outliers that you see before opening kickoff?
I think it's a tale of two parts of the season, three parts. It's really three parts. If you go back to when the playoffs started, nobody who understands how to do power ratings had Kansas City anywhere near Baltimore at the end of the regular season. Kansas City got the gift by when they were locked into their playoff spot in week 18. They got to rest their starters. They became very live to many of us, and we rode the coattails of that. Without that week 18 rest, I don't think they'd be where they were. But anybody who had Kansas City within even 4 points of Baltimore at the end of the regular season, I think was missing the boat. Now, at the end of May, I had them really, really close together, but still Baltimore by a half a point above Kansas City. And then I stopped my work and I'm back to the work now. And what I've seen now, I have Kansas City either equal or a little bit better than Baltimore. Regular season, week 1 power rating. That's all I care about. Do I think Kansas City is a better team? Actually, yes. Week 1, I'm not so sure because of a number of different factors and matchup factors. But other than that, Kansas City, Chris Jones is happy. They drafted well. Yes, they lost their best cover corner, but this is why coaching matters. I mean, if somebody went to Pete Carroll in Seattle, or they go to Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, they get coached up, and that helps their career, and they get better. And I think Kansas City makes players better. And it's showing because some of these kids are defending the pass very, very well. Pacheco runs hard. He's a good fit for this team. Didn't they bring in Juju Smith-Schuster recently, which is a better fit for them because he catches the ball. He won't drop the ball. Kansas City had a lot of problem with drop passes last year. So there's no doubt Kansas City is better than they were at the end of the last year regular season. And I've accounted for that. They're no longer 4.5 points different than Baltimore. They're right there or maybe even a drop ahead. Baltimore's concern with me is losing 3 offensive linemen. But there's no question there's a lot of team talent here. I mean, they were number 1 for a reason last year because they're very deep. It's a very deep roster. You mentioned Cincinnati. You mentioned the Jets. I mean, it's hard to sign a power rating on those teams because Burrow, we haven't seen fully healthy for a long time. We don't know about the Chase drama. They're still retooling on the offensive line. They're still retooling in the pass rush. They're still trying to find the right combination in the secondary. Burrow's got the it factor. He's healthy. And I think Cincinnati is as alive as anybody in that division. And the Jets, I don't know. I mean, they have a top 3 defense. They're much better at offensive line. They're better at wide receiver. They're deep at running back. And they have a head case at quarterback, who, if he sticks to on the field stuff, I have the Jets winning that division. If we start dividing the locker room, if he starts pouting or if he starts doing weird things where he doesn't try to squeeze in a pass, even though he's got a rifle arm and he can do that, but he doesn't want to hurt his stat sheet, or he starts shaking his head and giving the eye test to one of his receivers who's not running the right route. I mean, what's the team chemistry going to look like if they lose 2 in a row?
Before we ask for your closing thoughts, this is right up Russell Saylor's alley here. You know, a division that I like to say every year we want to anoint the team that's going to finish first, and we can easily pencil in the team that finishes last. Well, what usually happens is the team we anoint for first poops the bed, and the team that we had penciled in for last is somewhere near the top. Last year, C.J. Stroud, Coach Ryan, they made it look effortless. And again, maybe it was the perfect storm. Maybe it was the Jaguars sliding down at the end. Maybe it was the Titans struggling, the Colts with Richardson injured. There was a lot of factors. And in the offseason, I don't understand why in holy hell that Houston brings in Stephon Diggs. Their wide receiving core was fine. Now you bring in a diva. Makes no sense to me. Then they bring in Joe Mixon. Again, another, I'm not calling him a cancer in the clubhouse, but it got a lot of wear and tear on those tires already. They bring him in. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I think they got a full year on Stroud. I think there's the R word and regression going to happen. I'm not saying they're going to be below 500, but I don't see the success that they had last year duplicating this year, Ron.
Now, when you go from a 4th place schedule to a 1st place schedule, when you have tape on their quarterback, game tape that you can make some adjustments for, and when you go from 0 primetime games to 4, it means your team has to be better in order to even be the same. And they were a play or two away from not making the playoffs last year, and it still would have been considered a fantastic year, even if they didn't make the playoffs, because of what their rookie quarterback did with an average offensive line and no running attack. So give them a lot of credit. Ted brought this up on our show this morning. He talked about, hey, he was a little bit concerned about all these defensive coaches being hired as new coaches. But the NFL is cyclical, and the only way to stop, with all the rules favoring offenses, is to get somebody who understands defensive concepts and somebody you'd play hard for. And DeMeco Ryans versus Lovie Smith was a tremendous difference in terms of how they played defense. Number 1 or number 2 yards per carry run defense in the entire NFL. And they did this with a whole bunch of makeshift people. They didn't, to their credit, as opposed to a lot of other teams, they didn't sit on their laurels. They have 5 new starters on defense, and I think they've upgraded the roster on defense. But like you, and I have tickets under 10.5 wins and under 10 wins on Houston. Like you, they still have to prove it to me with this extra schedule. They're going to play 3 uncommon opponents, that Indianapolis and Jacksonville, and a rebuilt Tennessee team that could be scary. They're going to have easier schedules than Houston. So they're going to have to prove it. And they might very well prove it, but it's going to be a grind. I wish I could find one team that I could say, that's the team that's going to go over the hump against them. I thought it might be Indy. What I saw in the preseason seems to me they're going to win some, they're going to lose some, they're going to play the same vanilla pass defense. They didn't attack cornerback like I wanted them to do. So they're not soft. They're a come-from-ahead loss late in games because they don't have sufficient cornerback play. I like Jacksonville as long as they don't get hurt because their GM hasn't helped with roster stacking. But I like Jacksonville because I'm in the minority, but I think Trevor Lawrence played really, really hurt last year. They were 8-3 at one point, and I think he's undervalued this year. So I don't want to completely rule out Jacksonville. I wish they had a better defense. They do have an upgrade at defensive coordinator. That's probably the team I would watch out for. I have Houston still winning the division, but I think 10 is the ceiling.
And as you see, we're an hour deep. And again, thank you so much for working OT today. I'll make sure we make it up on the back end here. It's been so long that we talked. As you know, you and I could talk for hours here. As Russell Saylor says, I miss Lovey. I do too. Trust me. I will not. I made it clear to myself this show I would not talk about the Patriots. We will talk about them next week. As we know, Jacoby Brissett will be the quarterback to start in Cincinnati right now, 9.5 point underdogs. There'll be about 40% of the Circa survivor pool on the Bengals. I mean, what could go wrong there, of course. But before I ask you for your closing thoughts, are you and being big Oregon fans, Pac-12? Are you drinking the Bo Nix Kool-Aid? I know Sean Payton, respect him as a head coach. He cut Samaje Perine, wasn't one of his. We're waiting for Javonte Williams to fall. They got McLaughlin, but he drafted Notre Dame's Estime, so get ready for him. Surprisingly cut fan favorite Tim Patrick. Are you buying the Bo Nix Kool-Aid, and thoughts on the Broncos?
Let's use a horse racing term, horses for courses. I think Bo Nix fits what Sean Payton likes to do. He's accurate. He's not going to do weird things like Russell Wilson did. Russell Wilson, who earlier in his prime and stuff like that, could get away with it. He was savvy. He didn't throw interceptions. He did a lot of these different things. But as he got older, he couldn't escape as much. His internal clock changed. He wanted to sit and make plays a little too much. Bo Nix is going to be read, react, throw. I mean, it's going to be boom, boom, boom. And he has a few of the characteristics that Drew Brees has that made Sean Payton a lot of money. Let's put it that way. So I think Bo Nix is ready, 60 career starts. I think there's a ceiling on him. I think he's not going to be as great as people think that he might lead the league in passing or something like that. I actually think Williams is going to rebound 2 years away from removed from injury. I think Williams and the run game is going to complement Bo Nix well. Teams have to cheat up on Denver because I think Nix's performance will drop off with the deep throw. And until Denver has better tight end play, you're short a weapon because that tight end is a rookie quarterback's best friend. And it's too bad they don't have a more dynamic tight end group, even though Sean Payton brought back somebody he trusts very much from his New Orleans days. He'll probably get a bump up in targets, but he's not going to be the top 15. He's not going to be a top 15 tight end in the NFL, which is unfortunate. But I think Bo Nix is fine. And you're talking about a team that, if you bet season win totals, only had to go 5 or 5.5, depending on where you got it. And I personally think that's low.
Well, as we always close this show off, I give you a nice little 7-yard button hook, an easy pass to start the season, and we'd love to hear from Ron's closing thoughts.
I should save this for next week, but I'll use it now because it's college too, and maybe it applies to Florida State and so on. But it definitely applies to the NFL. Once the games have been played week 1, don't overreact. Things happen. Teams didn't play their starters all year. Teams play all preseason. Some teams dressed their starters for a half of one game out of 3. Some did a little bit more. Chicago and Houston maybe a little bit ahead of the curve because they got 4 preseason games. I actually think that made a difference in terms of their readiness for week 1, perhaps, Chicago and Houston. So the first thing that you react, we haven't had real football for 5 months or something like that, 6 months. The first thing you see out there, don't overreact. Oh, this team is terrible. This team is great or whatever. If you've done your homework, if you made your notes on your team sheets, if you've done your power ratings and so on and so forth, trust the process, as we say. Don't overreact. I mean, if there's a pattern that develops, that's one thing, but try not to throw everything out the window that you put together just because you saw the first 30 or 60 minutes of action and it didn't go as you thought it would.
Well, the scroller's been going the whole time. Everyone here, and it's been standing room only. We can't thank you enough. A lot of people in the chat. We didn't get to, obviously, all the questions and comments, but I want to give a shout out to Hector, give a shout out to Russell Saylor, give a shout out to DT plus the points, who had some thoughts on Philly. We promised to get back to that next week, as they will open up next Friday in Brazil. And I guess word on the street is stay in your hotel room, I guess, and we'll get to that obviously next week. But Ron, tell everyone where they can find all your work. I know you do some work for Wager Talk. I know you do some other shows with Ted and Chris, but tell everyone where they can find them.
Well, thanks again. This is a weekly thing we're going to do because I really look forward to it. I love just shooting the breeze with you. It's such easy talk to go through, and your own preparation shows. So I like shows like that. I have about 90 plus college previews that are up at Wager Talk. I have the 10 and 20-minute videos that I did that I think are still relevant because it gives you a snapshot of what I think they did in the draft and so on. I had a number of, like yourself, guest people on the show that imparted their wisdom, you with New England and various people with the Chargers and with the Bengals and so on, all standout handicappers or analysts in their own right. So I enjoy doing those series. So I have videos, I have shows with Chris, I have shows with Ted, I have shows with you. I'll be on Sports Grid every once in a while, I think. So we'll just see what happens. I love the networking part of this process, and that's very important to me.
Well, we broke a record. We're at the hour 7 minute mark. I can't thank you enough. Go enjoy the games this weekend. We got college football Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then we'll be ready for week 2 of college football, and of course the kickoff on the NFL Thursday. Catch myself and Ron here at 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific. In 45 minutes, Brady Tinker, the voice of the Cowboys, long, good friend, colleague, going to talk some Dallas Cowboys, give us the inside scoop on the backfield, what's going on with Dak, CD's paid, what's going on with Mr. Parsons, and his favorite team, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs. From myself, Jeff Dawson at EC Sports Invest, the one, the only, Mr. Ron Marmalefsky at Ron A Sports. We wish everyone a blessed evening. We'll be back in about 45 minutes. Get ready for some college football, guys. We'll see you soon.